Okay, we're going to conclude here in the equal rights chapter. We're on slide number 45. One of the challenges of equality is that it's very, very difficult because it requires people to shed their preconceived ideas about how other people think, behave, and feel. Okay, one of the challenges of a free society in a society that is pluralistic, when I mean pluralistic, there's all kinds of viewpoints, right? Whether it is secular, or whether it is religious in nature, or whether it's political in nature, or whether it is, again, in this chapter, we talked about, all kinds of different groups, right? At different ethnicities, different race, right? Race concerns, and then you deal with homosexuality and help for us old guys and all the kinds of stuff like that. One of the challenges in America, in that kind of a pluralistic society, is how do we live with our deepest differences? When our differences are fundamental, when our differences are non-negotiable, and when they're a big part of our lives, okay? And one of the things we need to have in America, and it's not as strong as it used to be, is this idea of tolerance, okay, for one another, and tolerance for different viewpoints, okay? So if you go to slide number 46, I want to show you the two different types of tolerance, okay? There's something called classical tolerance that has been around for hundreds of years, okay? And then the contemporary tolerance that is emerging today. And I want you to judge which one do you think leads to the greatest degree of human flourishing, which one leads to a liberal, free society, and which one leads to an illiberal society, a non-free society that becomes coercive, okay? So classical tolerance is this, and again, we all have differences, okay? That's by virtue of being alive, by virtue of being human. But how, can we respect one another in the midst of that, and how do we best do that? Classical tolerance argued this: I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Okay, that's classical tolerance. Classical tolerance protects people, not ideas. In other words, classical tolerance was a secondary virtue, okay? In other words, in this hierarchy of virtue and good things, okay? Beyond tolerance, there's a higher standard, and that's called truth, okay? And this idea of truth, okay, some form of a transcendent reference point, acts almost like a backstop, if you understand your baseball, right? And particularly when I was coaching my kids when they were little, and they first started pitching, you were very, very thankful for a backstop, because first of all, you had a little guy or a little gal playing catcher, and they didn't always catch the ball. And so the great thing is you had this backstop, right? This cage behind that person, this wall of metal that would stop the ball, so you wouldn't have to, you spend about, 5 minutes between pitches chasing balls around, okay? That's this idea of truth, is that classical tolerance allows all ideas to get out into the marketplace, into a society. Let them all get out there, okay? I will tolerate what you say. In other words, I disagree with what you're saying, but I will defend your right to say it. Why? Because they always knew behind that idea that was flying around, there was always a backstop called truth, and that people were held to account to a higher standard, okay? Back in, medieval times, or in Europe, during Christendom, there was always this, you're going to answer to God for what you're saying. You can say whatever you want, but at the end of the day, even if you're not judged by society, there is a judge that you're accountable to, okay? So it allowed for people to be respected, even as ideas could be challenged. But you were allowed to have them, but people weren't harmed or vilified by having those ideas, okay? Does that make sense? And that's because tolerance was a secondary virtue. There was always something higher than it that it deferred to, so it allowed for a lot of freedom, okay? So in this conception, intolerance is a refusal to allow contrary opinions to express themselves in public, okay? Here's intolerance. When I'm talking and I'm trying to convey my view, you go like this, okay? That's intolerance, okay? Let the views get out there, regardless. We'll evaluate them. And so ideas were challenged by free inquiry and persuasion. So if you can be very persuasive, you can get your view across. And again, if it's really true, it's going to stand. It's going to stand the test of time. It's going to stand reality, okay? So anyway, that's classical tolerance, okay? That was the version of tolerance that was around in America's founding, okay? The contemporary tolerance, okay, if you go to slide number 47. This is a different form of tolerance because in this conception, tolerance is not the secondary virtue. Tolerance is the primary virtue. Okay, truth is gone. Any reference to any, transcendent moral reference point or there is no backstop. The only thing that is ultimate is tolerance. So in this view, all beliefs and claims are equally true and valid, and no absolutism is permitted. In other words, if you claim absolute truth, there is only one brand of truth, right? Is that there are some fixed reference points in life. Here's an example. I believe that torturing babies is wrong. That's an absolute for all time, okay? It's wrong. I don't care where you are. We just don't do that, okay? In modern tolerance, that form of absolutism is not permitted because you got to allow all ideas out there, and they're equally true, okay? In other words, if torturing babies is not wrong, and that's equally valid to, I think it's great to pick a flower for your mom and give it to her on Mother's Day. There's some concerns there, okay? And again, the reason is because in the modern conception of tolerance is a primary virtue. It's the ultimate thing, okay? So as a result of that, intolerance of other viewpoints is considered the greatest cultural sin. So intolerance under this definition, okay, is not preventing different viewpoints from getting out there like classical tolerance. Intolerance in modern tolerance is any questioning or contradicting the view that all opinions are equal in value and that all worldviews have equal worth and all stances are equally valid. Okay, so under this viewpoint, the worldview of Adolf Hitler, okay, and how he looked at Jews is equally as valid as the worldview of George Washington, or pick your favorite politician today, okay? There's no fundamental difference, okay, under that viewpoint of intolerance, okay? So ideas that are challenged, okay, they're labeled discrimination or bigotry if you hold to some form of absolute, okay? You see the difference? So in this form of tolerance, okay, it protects ideas, not people. So people can be vilified if they stand for absolute views, true for all people, okay? So again, you just need to know the difference. And again, the question I would ask you is, which do you think leads to the greatest degree of human flourishing? Classical tolerance or modern tolerance, okay? And the view of modern tolerance is pretty prevalent, okay? Pretty prevalent in our society, okay? I want to close with this, okay? Because as we're talking about equality and clashing viewpoints, this is what I call helpful ground rules for a civil society, okay? And this is from something called the Williamsburg Charter that was drafted in 1988, I believe it is, by, I think, over 200 statesmen and leaders in America, Supreme Court justices, former presidents, okay, pretty great group of people. And I think this is a great template as we're talking about the free flow of ideas and how do we tolerate how do we live with our deepest differences when those differences are fundamental, when those differences are irreducible, when those differences are non-negotiable, okay? Let me just read it. First, those who claim the right to dissent must assume the responsibility to debate. In other words, you gotta have conversations. Second, those who claim the right to criticize should assume the responsibility to comprehend. So you got to listen to people. You actually have to have dialogue and conversation, not a one-way monologue or a one-way shouting match, or an internet mob. Third, those who claim the right to influence should also accept the responsibility not to inflame. Fourth, those who claim the right to participate should accept the responsibility to persuade. What are they arguing for? They're arguing for a public square based on classical tolerance and the ability to have conversations and to listen to one another and to persuade one another, okay? That is how our system of government was set up. It is it has devolved and digressed in the modern era. But anyway, I want to leave you with that, just something to think about as we conclude this chapter on equal rights. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. We'd love to talk, or drop in on our weekly, on my weekly office hours on Zoom, okay? Take care and have a great rest of your week.